there is something I feel we should discuss. There is a critically important race happening in 2023. Oh, there's going to be a lot of important races in 2024. We got to have build up our communities and get ready for 2024, certainly. But right now, there's an important one. And that's happening in Wisconsin. Judge Janet Protasiewicz is running for Wisconsin Supreme Court. If she wins, we are likely to have democracy in our country and in Wisconsin. If she doesn't, that's genuinely in jeopardy. Here's my man, Mehdi Hassan, explaining what's going on.
It's called the Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC. But the Central African country isn't exactly known for the strength of its democracy. After gaining its independence from Belgium, the DRC struggled with civil war. The country's fledgling democracy has really only existed since 2006, with the election of President Joseph Kabila, elected after his father, President Laurent Kabila, was assassinated in 2001. It hasn't been smooth sailing. The DRC's latest election, held in 2018, was marked by chaos and confusion. Voting was supposed to have taken place in 2016, but was delayed 2 years, then delayed another week due to logistical challenges. Huge lines delayed voting, and the election was plagued by reports of mistakes on ballots, broken machines, and general disorder. So, you might be sitting at home in America thinking, wow, thank goodness I don't live in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Thank goodness I live in America where we have free and fair elections. Well, not quite. What if I told you that there is an American state right now in the 21st century whose democratic credentials aren't much better than those of the DRC? No, seriously. Because if you live in Wisconsin, you're not living in a very small d democratic place. You're just not. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but according to a study by Harvard's Election Integrity Project, quote, the integrity of Wisconsin's electoral boundaries is on par with Jordan, Bahrain, and the Congo.
Before we get into why that is, aren't you embarrassed? That's embarrassing to me. That a state in my country ranks like that, is called a democracy desert. I'm embarrassed by that. I now have friends in the online left that include people from outside of the U.S., and I got to go try to hold my head high when I talk to them. And I got that. Sucks, man. When you talk to people, we're all on the internet. When you talk to people from other countries, doesn't that embarrass you? It embarrasses me, man. Genuinely. Separate from the race for Judge Janet on the Supreme Court, I do want to say, look at your state and look at whether or not your districts are drawn by the state legislature. If they are, you should change that. We've done other videos on this. In the VOD for this, I will put up as well the links necessary to... Hell, I'll update this description in a moment. The links necessary to check if your state has its districts drawn by the legislature and what you can do to change that. If it is, I'll put in the links necessary. But do check that, because that's what it comes down to. And by the way, Michigan used to be that way, with the legislature drawing the districts, and we were gerrymandered. And surprise, surprise, Republicans kept controlling things until the people changed it. Insisted it change. We went to the ballots. We changed the way we would do redistricting after the census. The results, right now, Democrats control House, Senate, and the governor seat. Also, Secretary of State. Also, Attorney General. Abortion bans are not happening in Michigan. The 1931 law that Republicans would have tried to enact that bans abortion, that's been taken off the books completely. Labor union protections have been put back in place after they were taken away by Republicans with our gerrymandered districts. Use the links. I'm going to add them now in the live stream. They will be there for the VOD. Check your state. But now let's go back to Wisconsin, because they're going to need your help, lefties. Or just, it doesn't matter what political side you're on. Democracy needs your help in Wisconsin. Let's listen to what the man has to say.
Yes. Shocking, right? How is it that a state in this country, the oldest democracy in the world, perhaps the proudest democracy in the world, is on a par with one of the world's lowest ranked democracies? Well, Wisconsin is what's known in the political science literature as a democracy desert. That is a place where gerrymandering of electoral boundaries and voter suppression laws have all but smothered the small d democratic process, made election outcomes foregone conclusions, made voters basically powerless when it comes to affecting political change. And this should worry all of you watching at home, because this isn't just about the future of the Badger State. This is about America and our entire country's small d democratic future.
NBC News is now projecting Joe Biden is the apparent winner in the state of Wisconsin. 10 electoral votes. That was an important prize in the Democrats' blue wall. So again, NBC News projecting that Joe Biden, the apparent winner of Wisconsin, 10 electoral votes.
Remember, Wisconsin is a key swing state, one of three in the Midwest, along with Michigan and Pennsylvania, seen as must-wins in the Electoral College for any presidential candidate trying to win the White House in 2024. Joe Biden won Wisconsin by just over 20,000 votes in 2020, and Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton there by a similarly narrow margin in 2016. So today I want to examine how democracy is dying in Wisconsin, why that has huge and dangerous consequences that go far beyond the borders of the Badger State, and why an upcoming state Supreme Court election in Wisconsin could put a nail in the coffin of that state and maybe even our country's democracy. The New York Times has called Wisconsin state Supreme Court race arguably the most important election in America in 2023. But before we get to that, first, let's go back to 2010, because to understand the assault on democracy and on free and fair elections in Wisconsin, you have to understand the sheer amount of brazen and anti-democratic gerrymandering that has gone on in Wisconsin. And that started back in 2010. Republicans took control of the governorship as well as the state Senate and Assembly. They fully controlled the state government there for the first time since 1998. It was a huge deal because it gave the GOP almost limitless power to redraw the state's political districts. They took full advantage of this power, redrawing multiple districts to favor Republicans. For example, take a look at Wisconsin's State Senate District 8. Before the 2011 redraw, it was a competitive district that included a portion of the liberal-leaning city of Milwaukee as well as a portion of the surrounding Republican suburbs. In 2011, District 8 was redrawn to be significantly redder. The area of District 8 that was in blue Milwaukee County was slashed in half. Or take Wisconsin's Senate Districts 21 and 22. Before 2011, each of these purple districts contained a liberal urban metro, Racine and Kenosha respectively, and each district contained conservative territory outside the cities. But in order to limit the power of liberal voters in those cities, Republicans packed Racine and Kenosha into one new district. By isolating liberal voters, the GOP created a new, safe Republican district. And the results were effective, according to research by Marquette Law School.
Just want to chime in to say, is it not telling that the GOP consistently engages in anti-democratic activity? Like any opportunity they have to take away the voice of the people, they will jump on. They are not interested in a fair fight. Tells you everything you need to know about what it is they actually do. They know they cannot exist when they know they cannot compete when the competition is fair. Truly disappointing adversaries to have in this political stage.
If the district maps had not been redrawn in 2011, the 2018 elections, for example, would have played out much differently for Wisconsin Dems. Democrats there would have won 46 seats in the 99-seat assembly under the previous map, but with the gerrymandered map in place, they only took 36 seats. To put it another way, a stark way, Democrats won in 2018 53% of votes cast for the state assembly, but only got 36% of the seats.
This was happening in Michigan consistently, and it wasn't until the populace began to get annoyed by the way the state was getting run that Michiganders really paid attention at all to how this was working. I'm as guilty as the next guy. Wasn't until we kept saying, wait a minute, people I'm talking to left and right don't like the way the state's being run. Why do the people who work for us, who are supposed to be doing what we say, damn elections, forget them for a second. They're supposed to be our employees. Why do they keep doing things we don't want them to do? It wasn't until that became a regular part of the conversation that it changed. It's going to happen in Wisconsin too. But first, this race for the Supreme Court in Wisconsin is key. Here's why.
In what world would you consider that a democratic outcome?
It's not.
In the Congo, maybe? Unfortunately, things have only gotten worse. Maps are redrawn every 10 years after the census. So just 2 years ago, Republicans got to move the lines even further in their favor. And the result? In 2022, they gained 3 more state house seats. The Wisconsin Assembly's Democratic minority leader said it best last year with this bleak pronouncement: democracy is not real when it comes to the legislature in Wisconsin. Now, of course, this didn't happen without a fight from local Democrats. In fact, when the Republican-led legislature sent their new 2021 maps to current Democratic Governor Tony Evers, he vetoed them.
Gerrymandered maps Republicans passed a decade ago have enabled legislators to safely ignore the people who elected them. And these maps here, they're more of the same.
With the legislature and the...
Lord knows, there is very few things I agree politically with Tony Evers on, but he deserves praise for that. It was an honorable decision. It genuinely was.
Governor in disagreement, Democrats wanted a federal court to step in as an objective third party and redraw the maps. But instead, the conservative Wisconsin State Supreme Court stepped in a victory for Republicans, saying that it would choose the new map with the least changes possible and without regard to partisan fairness, supposedly. So Governor Evers and Republicans went back to the drawing board, each submitting new maps for the court.
There are 2 futures we're looking at in 2024, by the way. There's the one where we don't have full control of the government, House, Senate, presidency. And then there's the one which I think is entirely achievable, in fact, plausible, which is where we do. And what we push for is going to be very dependent on how much power we have. One of the things we should push for, particularly since Biden will be looking to secure his legacy, one of the things we should push for is packing the court, the Supreme Court, because of decisions like that. Other rules that could kick out people like Amy Coney Barrett are necessary. Certainly, people like Clarence Thomas, they got to go. They got to go. But even if we're not going to put in rules like saying there is now an ethical code for the Supreme Court, even if we're not going to do that, we've got to pack it, plain and simple. putting in more judges is necessary. And that should be a goal of 2024 if we do well. Again, though, let's go to this race. And he's taken a minute to get there, but I feel like this context is important because it demonstrates so much about why this country runs the way it runs. Why it feels like we are fighting against a group that is equal in number to us, even though public opinion is constantly on our side. The majority of Americans constantly want what lefties want, by and large. But we keep having to, we just keep going righter and righter and righter, more and more conservative and even regressive in American politics. This is why. Because the game ain't set up fair in a lot of places in the United States.
To consider. And in a shocking turn of events, the Wisconsin Supreme Court, which is split currently 4-3 in favor of conservatives, actually backed Evers' new map, with the swing justice Brian Hagedorn flipping on that vote. But like Lucy swiping the football away from Charlie Brown at the last second, the 6-3 Republican supermajority on the U.S. Supreme Court swooped in after Wisconsin Republicans appealed the state court decision and promptly threw out Evers' map, keeping Wisconsin as the democracy desert it sadly became.
Pack the court.
But it's not just gerrymandering by a GOP-dominated state legislature that's helped undermine democracy in Wisconsin. The Badger State has also pioneered the kind of autocratic, authoritarian executive rule at a state level that we've become so familiar with in recent years at a national level. Long before there was Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis, there was Scott Walker. First elected governor of Wisconsin in 2010, right-wing Republican Walker immediately went to work dismantling the state's labor unions with the infamous Act 10.
Our bill is about protecting the hardworking taxpayer. It's about Wisconsin families trying to make ends meet and help their children.
World's most punchable
Well,
face.
the taxpayers who occupied the Wisconsin Capitol building in 2011 didn't look too happy with the change. People slept in there overnight. Democratic state senators even fled Wisconsin in an attempt to stall the legislation. Unfortunately, Act 10 passed, marking the opening salvo in a 10-year anti-labor crusade that has successfully wrested power away from Wisconsin's workers. The bill shackled public sector unions and contributed to a 70% decline in membership over the last decade. Today, just 8% of the state's workforce belongs to a union. Act 10 wasn't just an attack on workers, it was a deliberate attack on the Democratic Party itself. That's because decreased money and power to unions meant decreased money to Democratic Party candidates. And don't take it from me, take it from infamous GOP activist Grover Norquist, who said in 2017, and I quote, "Trump's unexpected victory in 2016 did not lay the groundwork for Republican political dominance, but the March 2011 signing of Act 10, a dramatic reform of public sector labor laws by Wisconsin Scott Walker, certainly did." To understate it, if Act 10 is enacted in a dozen more states, the modern Democratic Party will cease to be a competitive power in American politics. It's that big a deal. Yes, it is. And Governor Walker did not stop there. He followed anti-union legislation with voter suppression laws, enacting a controversial voter ID law. After some delay in the courts, the law took effect in 2016 and immediately had the predicted effect of deterring people of color and low-income residents from voting. In 2017, two University of Wisconsin political scientists found that discouraged black voters more than 3 times as often as white voters.
That was the goal.
Meanwhile, less than a third of Wisconsin's colleges provided IDs that allowed their students to vote, effectively disenfranchising another Democratic-leaning demographic, young people. Or as cool Harley-Davidson-loving Governor Scott Walker described it, common sense.
Our legislation makes it easy to vote but hard to cheat. And that's something that I think puts Hillary Clinton's opposition to that, puts her out of touch with the vast majority of mainstream Americans out there who think pulling out a photo ID is a perfectly logical and common sense thing to do.
That's despite the fact that fewer than 200 cases of voter fraud in Wisconsin have been prosecuted over the last decade.
This here poll tax ain't nothing that a law-abiding citizen got to worry about. Not if your granddaddy used to vote. No, sir. No, sir. That's how that's going to appear to future generations. What an embarrassment.
By the time Walker was defeated in 2018, Wisconsin had become a full-on laboratory for the GOP's autocratic experiment. And we know that all of this was intentional, a deliberate strategy to neuter any opposition, because in 2022, Republican gubernatorial candidate Tim Michels said the quiet part out loud.
Republicans will never lose another election in Wisconsin after I'm elected governor.
Christ.
Thankfully for democracy, he lost. But the Republicans have always known what they were doing, gaming the system to skew the entire political system in their favor. Scott Walker continued to do this even after his election defeat in 2018, using the final lame duck weeks of his administration to basically stomp Wisconsin democracy further into the dirt. Just 24 days before leaving office, Walker signed a package of bills, one of which restricted early in-person voting to just 2 weeks before an election, down from the almost 7 weeks allowed in some of Wisconsin's most liberal cities. Perhaps most egregious of all, Walker signed laws to hamstring the power of the incoming Democratic governor that he had just lost to. How can you say elections matter in a place like Wisconsin when the will of the voters is just so casually and so blatantly disregarded by the people in power?
They are not, Republicans are not fans of democracy. They are not fans of a fair fight. They're cowards. They are undemocratic. They have bad ideas for legislation because they are legislating selfishly. They know it. And they know most voters know it. And they know most voters can't be distracted by bigotry. They know most voters see through them. So they are interested in removing the ability of voters to choose who will govern them.
Republicans in power. How does this meet any kind of definition of democracy? Fast forward from 2018 to today to 2023 and April's upcoming and oh so crucial election for a newly opened seat on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, one that will either keep the conservative majority or flip it to a liberal one. One that could have major ramifications for both Wisconsin's and America's democracy. See, Wisconsin elects state Supreme Court justices to 10-year terms and is one of 38 states that uses elections in some shape or form when it comes to its highest court. By the way, let's pause for a moment to consider just how ridiculous it is that we even have elections for state Supreme Courts. The US, as ever, is an anomaly here. Only 5 countries in the entire world elect judges at any level. And even among those countries, elections typically don't apply to the highest courts. I mean, fun fact, judges are not politicians, nor should they be. But in places like Wisconsin, not only are judges campaigning for votes, those campaigns have become increasingly partisan. The current matchup is between the liberal judge Janet Protasewicz and conservative former state Supreme Court Justice Daniel Kelly. He's trying to get back on the Supreme Court after losing a re-election bid in 2020. And yes, it's liberal versus conservative, not Democrat versus Republican, because, you know, it's a non-partisan race. Go figure. Protasewicz has focused heavily on her opposition to the state's 1849 law banning abortion that's making its way through the courts there. And she's made it clear.
And also is pro-democracy. Shocking to me that it's necessary to point that out.
She
as a plus. Christ, that's a rough. There we are. Shocking to me that it's necessary to point that out as a plus. Not being pro-democracy should automatically disqualify everyone from running for a Democratic seat. Not by the rules, but by the tone of the voters. By the taste of the voters. But it's not the America we live in right now. She is pro-democracy. The other guy ain't. She needs our help. Let's help her. Link in the description.
is, quote, rigged. Both are points that her opponents on the right have latched onto, as well as painting her as soft on crime. But Protasewicz and her supporters are dominating the airwaves with a barrage of attacks on Daniel Kelly and his record.
Extremist Dan Kelly wants abortion banned, even in cases of rape, incest, and the health of the mother. Kelly wrote that Social Security was similar to slavery.
Kelly even went on tour promoting the big lie.
Dan Kelly, an extremist who doesn't care about us.
For his part,
Accurate.
Kelly has accused Protasewicz of lies and slander in her ads, but so far has only aired a single TV ad of his own, accusing her of being a politician, not a judge. Throughout the race, Kelly has slammed his opponent for being too openly partisan, suggesting she will be an activist, radical left judge, and he says he will offer something different.
When people ask you about particular issues, redistricting or abortion, what do you say to them?
I say the same boring thing that I do every single time. I will decide those cases the same way I've decided all cases on the Supreme Court, according to what the law commands. I'm running to be the most boring member of the Supreme Court.
Thing is, Kelly and his record are anything but boring. Before he became a Supreme Court justice, he wrote extensively in a blog on a wide range of subjects. He reacted to the Supreme Court decision recognizing same-sex marriage by writing, "We today no longer have a democracy, much less a republic." He compared affirmative action to slavery, writing in a passage he actually included in his application to become a state Supreme Court justice, "Neither can exist without the foundational principle that it is acceptable to force someone into an unwanted economic relationship, morally and as a matter of law. They are the same." After he was appointed, Kelly had the blog posts pulled down, a spokesperson said at the time, to avoid the impression that he was actively commenting on political issues while on the bench. As a justice, Kelly also wrote the state Supreme Court decision that found the city of Madison could not ban guns on buses, and he's criticized conservative swing Justice Brian Hagedorn as supremely unreliable for daring to side with liberals on cases like redistricting and in upholding Joe Biden's 2020 win in Wisconsin. Which brings me to the big doozy. After Kelly lost his 2020 re-election bid, he went on to become a paid advisor for both the state and the national GOP as it was devising its fake elector scheme, you know, the Trumpian plan in some of the key states won by Biden to submit an alternate slate of electors who would vote for Trump, not Biden, and thereby overturn the 2020 election results. Ah, the modern GOP. All roads lead back to 1-6 and the big lie. The Milwaukee
You will recall that about 1,000 times on this channel, I have said we need to get state investigations going into the fake elector plots. State-level investigations. One of the reasons I give, aside from the fact that it wouldn't allow Trump to be pardoned, aside from the fact that Merrick Garland moves at the speed that I imagine Trump fucks. Aside from that, it would ensure that these state-level criminals are accounted for. One of the states that could open an investigation into the fake elector plot where votes were nearly made irrelevant is Wisconsin. So could Arizona. So could Pennsylvania. So could New Mexico. So could Nevada. Wisconsin is one of those states. That would mean people like this, that punk right there, they would be under investigation for their attempts to undo democracy in the United States of America. And they ought to be. If you live in one of those states, Nevada, New Mexico, Arizona, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. You live in one of those states, write your attorney general. Tell them that you want an investigation opened at the state level into the fake elector plots.
Milwaukee Journal Sentinel reported in February that Kelly had been paid over $120,000 in that advisory role, payments which continued until at least December of 2022. The paper also notes testimony from the former state GOP chair to the January 6th committee, saying he had pretty extensive conversations with Kelly, who was serving as the party's special counsel at the time. So much for boring. When Protasevich brought this up at the only debate of the race earlier this week, here's how Kelly responded.
So once again, they're lying. His testimony was also that he had one conversation with me, 30 minutes, in which he asked if I was in the loop on the alternate electors slate. I told him I wasn't, because I wasn't. And that was the end of the matter.
I would very much like to find out if that's true. I would very much like the Department of Justice to find out if that's true. I would very much like to see if he's willing to repeat that under oath in a court of law. I bet he's not. I bet he's not.
I was in the loop on the alternate electors slate. I told him I wasn't, because I wasn't.
Would he say that in a court of law under oath, where it is a crime to lie? Because it's not a crime to lie up there. I don't think he would.
And that was the end of the matter.
Doesn't have to be.
That's the end of the matter. She's just telling lies. Solid defense there, Dan. But hey, at least he's admitted in recent weeks that Joe Biden is the duly elected president, so there's that. But think about it. For a guy who thinks his opponent is too partisan, too radical to serve on the state Supreme Court, he's got a pretty radical background of his own, and with abortion rights, redistricting, and potentially even the certification of a presidential election all on the line in this race, it's no wonder then that this election has become the most expensive ever for a race of its kind. According to political news site WizPolitics.com, more than $27 million has been spent in this race so far, nearly double the previous record, and most of it from outside special interest groups. Wisconsin is one of a growing number of states, in fact, where spending is growing across the board for these judicial, not just political races, as they become the next battleground for a right-wing authoritarian Republican takeover. The 2019-2020 cycle saw more spending on state Supreme Court races than each of the previous 9 cycles. And in the last cycle, for example, we saw $15 million spent in North Carolina and $6 million in the state of Ohio, bolstering conservatives in both places. But Wisconsin's Supreme Court battle is especially important and especially consequential. Remember, again, Wisconsin is a swing state where just around 20,000 votes decided both the 2016 presidential race for Trump and the 2020 race for Biden. So, picture this scene for a moment. It's 2024, just after the November elections. Republicans have won the state House and Senate again with a minority of the vote, and 20,000 votes separate the Republican and Democratic candidates for president in must-win Wisconsin again. The result is contested in the courts and makes its way up to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. That court gets to decide the fate of Wisconsin's 10 crucial electoral college votes and perhaps the fate of America. The justices there vote in a 4-3 decision, and the deciding vote is Dan Kelly, a man who actively worked for the GOP during its attempt to create fake electors and to undo the results of the 2020 presidential election. That is what's at stake when voters go to the polls on April the 4th in Wisconsin. It's not just their state Supreme Court balance on the line. It could be American democracy itself.
Help Judge Janet. Judge Janet believes in democracy. Shouldn't be a special thing. But there is a candidate for that seat, for that job, that doesn't believe in democracy. That's her opponent. You can donate money if you've got a couple of bucks to donate. You can volunteer for her campaign if you've got the time to volunteer. Help her out. I gave $5. That's what I had. I would recommend we do everything in our power to help Judge Janet. I shouldn't say I gave $5 to that campaign. I gave $5 to, what was it? The Wisconsin Democratic Party. I honestly, honest to God, get so wrapped up in this stuff. It blends together. But I'm going, God help me, to try to volunteer to make calls regardless. Do what you can. I've included the link in the description. You can help. Help her. At the very least, if you know somebody in Wisconsin, tell them about this. Make sure they know about it. It's that important.